So I know I've been creating slide of videos that are like one section. This one's going to cover two. It's going to be 3.5 cost of production, as well as 3.6 changes in supply. And it's because they're a little bit smaller. And as you get more comfortable with the language, you can go a little bit faster. And so there'll be less notes to take. Hopefully that makes sense. And hopefully it's not too much, but just right. I'm going for just right. So this is going to cover this slide. By the way, it's connected here if you ever want to pull up the slideshow. But I do think the video is better because you get explanations. And the point is not fast. The point is understanding best you can. And then setting up the reading. And so when you read, it makes a lot more sense. And it's a little, feels easy, but only because you're familiar, you just kind of went over this concept similarly. You get a chance to go over it twice. Okay, cost of production changes. Cost of production are going to give you a way to get to profit. And that's where you really want to be as a business. And sometimes the cost of production can be big, sometimes it can be small, sometimes it can be marginal. And really, it comes to how do firms decide how much labor to hire? What's the optimal amount of labor to maximize profit? What are production costs? How do the firms decide how much to produce? And that's going to be related to demand and supply, but also cost is a factor because per unit cost will affect profit. So I kept mentioning we're going to come to profit. Here we are, um, getting to cost, which will lead to profit. The firm's labor decisions. First thing a company has to decide is how the number of workers will they hire is going to affect their total production. You hire too many people, you're not going to make enough profit. If you hire not enough people, when you have to increase a lot supply, you're not going to be able to handle it. And so it's the marginal product of labor, the difference of hiring one extra unit. When you think margin, consider your piece of paper is right at the edge. What's that one more make a difference? What's that one more make a difference? Um, how much of a difference does it make? So go ahead and write that in. Marginal product of labor. How much return do we get on that one more person, that one more worker? Is it worth it? Is it not worth it? It'll depend. And you should calculate it ahead of time, not be guessing. Now, some of it is a guess because you don't know for sure what the consumer is going to do, but you have an idea, you have a hope. Yeah, so you do have some idea, but you're not like for sure, but you're hopeful for sure. So it's kind of like that. All right, let's make it a little bigger and go to the next one. So marginal returns. You will get increasing marginal returns when the marginal production levels increase with new investment. Huh? What does that mean? You should be asking that because that's a lot of jargon. Uh, so when you produce just a little bit more, how much are you getting back? And at some point, when you produce more, you're actually going to make less. That's when you get to diminishing marginal returns. Once you get decrease in production levels based on new investments, you should stop increasing productions, right? Because you're getting less out of it, unless your overall return and costs and margin are still pretty high. But generally, once you get to diminishing margin returns, you're going to want to decrease production or not go there. If you get a negative marginal returns, you've gone way too far. When the marginal product of labor turns negative, you've gone way too far on your costs. That's why people are looking at costs. That's why when it's slow, the restaurant will send the waiters, some of the wait staff home. That's what's going on there. All right. But they do want to be prepared for a big rush because then you can make a ton of profit. And lots of times it's the big days that sell things out. Let's look at this before we go to do 45 because there's beanbags. Who doesn't like a good beanbag? Yeah, joking, of course. But again, you see, what are we looking at here? We're looking at a chart on, um, it's really uh, a cost schedule for labor. So if you have 0 workers, you're not going to produce anything. You're not going to make any money. So you're never going to produce 0. So that's just pointing out that you're not going to make any beanbags. You have no workers. Now, if you only have 1 worker, that person's going to shoot out 4 beanbags in an hour. You get 2, you're going to get 10 an hour. So you're getting 5 per worker. If you got 3, you're getting almost 6 per worker. So pretty much 7. But then once you go to 4 workers, you're at 23 beanbags, and then 28. So the per beanbag per worker diminishes when you go from 3 to 4 workers. But you still might want 4 because the overall production's more. Maybe you want 5 even because the overall production's there. And in case some people get sick, you'll have it covered and you'll still be in the 3 to 5 range. But you probably don't want 6 because that's a big jump down. And 7 or 8 doesn't seem like a good deal either because you're getting less and less return. You only get 1 more for that 1 more worker, and it probably costs too much. So somewhere in the 3 to 5 range is probably going to be your sweet spot. But the per unit productivity is highest at 3 laborers. Hopefully that makes sense. That makes sense that the per unit productivity, so you're getting 6 plus, you're getting less than 6 here. You're getting 6 2/3, and you're getting just under 6 here, but it's close. Right? It really would depend on per unit cost versus per unit profit. Okay, as well as working with supply and demand, but probably it's 3. A fixed cost is a cost does not change regardless of how much of a good is produced. If you have a warehouse, you got to pay the rent on the warehouse. If you have an office building, you got to pay it. Your salaries. If you have salaried employees, it doesn't matter the hours they work. They're going to cost what they're going to cost. Variable costs are costs that rise or fall depending on how much is produced. This will be the cost of your raw materials. This will be some of your labor costs if you have hourly employees. Let's go ahead and write that up. So fixed cost, again, is things that don't change. Think rent, think salaries, because it's not hourable. If you think variable costs, think of your product costs, your raw materials, or your hourly employee costs. All right, let's go to the next one. Total cost is fixed cost plus variable cost. That's simple. Marginal cost is the additional cost of producing 1 more unit of good. But you want to look at diminishing returns. You want to look at negative returns because that's where you're going to really be at the profit margins. Marginal revenue is the additional income from selling 1 more unit of a good. So if I just sell 1 more, how much am I going to make? So do I go up or down in price to make that sale? That's what I'm going to have to determine. It usually is equal to price, but not always. Demand can be a factor too, as well as cost. Well, so yeah, but it's usually price is the key issue. Determine the best level of output. Firms to determine the output level at which marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. Marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. And if you have a big differential, then you might even have a better. So it's basically the production cost. You're going to have to look at the production cost to determine how much I should spend to produce. So firms decide. Notice I always include the words in the question and the answer. If you don't do that, you're going to get 0. So do that because I want to get you full credit, but I also need to know you know how to write a sentence. Able to hire by calculating production costs. So they're doing, they're figuring out how much it costs, and then let's see what I wrote. Firms decide how much labor to hire. Business owners have to consider how the number of workers they hire will affect their total production. The marginal, so it's their production costs. Marginal product of labor is the change in output from hiring one additional unit of labor or worker. Was I almost hard by calculating production costs. That's it. But it's not just production costs. They're really comparing productivity to production costs. Not just the cost, it's how much you're making too. Production costs are fixed and variable. That'll do it. How do firms decide how much to produce? Firms determine, if you write this, of course, it'll be wrong, right? You have to write the rest of what I said. Firms determine production costs by analyzing marginal returns. If it's increasing, diminishing, or negative, they're analyzing marginal, spell it out, marginal returns. Okay, I'm not typing every single character for you, right? Marginal returns there. But I will tell you. And so there it is. So that section took us 12 minutes. So we can easily continue. So we will. So let's continue and go to changes in supply. Now we're looking at supplies. This is a janitor's closet. How do input costs affect supply? How can the government affect supply? Give examples of how other factors influence supply. Okay. Input costs and supply. Any change in the cost of an input will affect the supply. So anything that goes into production, it's going to affect how much you're going to supply. If the raw materials, the machinery, the labor increases or decreases in costs, it'll affect how much you can supply at that particular that product. Any change in the cost. But this is about cost of any input. Input is anything along the production line. And as input costs go up, increase, the firm's marginal costs increase, causing a decrease in profitability and supply. So you get a supply shift to the left. If the input costs go way too high, you're going to have to compensate somehow, some way. Input costs can also decrease, though they tend to usually go up. But it's theoretically possible that your cost to produce will go down if you have, I don't know, some glut in the market, some lack of consumption, somewhere along the way, costs change. Technology can improve too. So, uh, exactly, new technology can greatly decrease costs. Let's say instead of having people assemble your car, you've created a way to manufacture with robots that can greatly decrease your costs because robots can go. You don't have to pay them as much. You have to pay to get them up and running and to maintain them, but generally they're going to work on their own as opposed to you have to constantly play human laborers. Examples include computers. It used to be the case where computers were much more expensive. Now you can get a decent laptop for a few $100s, Even though it might not be the crazy high end, it's still pretty good. So the big shifter now on changes in supply, we're looking at tech. So if you got tech helps decrease the cost. You're going to get a shift of the supply curve to the right because you're able to produce more of that supply at that given price. If you get an increase in input costs, say you rely on oil or gasoline or whatever, then you get a supply curve to the left as you'll be willing to supply lefts at that given price. In other words, by raising or lowering the cost of producing goods, government can encourage or discourage an entrepreneur or industry. So generally, they're going to want to encourage because it maximizes the benefit to the whole economy. Growth, as we've said, is an essential element in any healthy economy. So let's write in our keywords here. Cost of production, again, is the issue. How do they do that? They can give subsidies, they can give land, they can give tax benefits, they can grant funds for research and development if they want to encourage people to do research and development on a particular item. Like I'm sure they gave monies to pharmaceuticals to develop vaccines, whether it was Moderna or Pfizer or Johnson and Johnson or whoever. We're talking about the government. Who's pictured here? Who's the guy pointing at you? What's his name? Uncle. Okay, hopefully you're able to finish that. But I'll be listening in class to see if you did or if you didn't. Oh, looks like 49 was done already. Let's get rid of that and make sure you have to write it in because I want you to follow it. Oh, yeah, I guess you do. Somehow I've already done it. I guess that's okay. How does government increase or encourage or discourage entrepreneurs or investment in business? There's a few tools. I mentioned one of them. They can directly fund, but they can also give subsidies. Like if they want people to stay in farming, but they know it's not that profitable, like, okay, look, no matter how much you produce, no matter what the cost is, we'll make sure you get a profit at this amount if you produce, regardless of what the market is doing. That's a subsidy. There's still agricultural subsidies today because we've been encouraging some farm policies because we want to avoid starvation in America, even though people are still hungry in America. Um, but it's why corn products are relatively cheap, or those products are often available in cafeterias or dairy or breads. Like wheat is pretty well subsidized too. Um, anyway, and as there's government subsidies, the supply of the good increase, which brings the cost down. Um, but it does encourage production because you get a reliable return. Taxes. With taxes, you can reduce the supply of some goods by with an excise tax to discourage things like alcohol, tobacco, or gun sales, making that item more expensive. Though the gun sales would get criticized by NRA in a heartbeat. But then you can also use regulation to control things. The government will step in and just directly control supply, quantity of good, price, um, by giving labels. Like they'll label certain meat, choice meat, or prime, or whatever. And these regulations impact price. Sometimes it's good though. Like you want to know when you're when it says corn oil, like in this little visual, it is corn oil. I want to look at this visual. Okay. See, they got the person up by their heels, Uncle Sam. See the flag, and they're trying to squeeze the money out of it. So the government helps encourage support. There's nothing wrong with capitalism that a government subsidy can't fix. As these rich guys are getting richer, it doesn't always trickle down to the little guy. In other words, other factors that affect the supply, the global economy. We saw that with certain things will happen. Like there was like a week where the Suez Canal got blocked up. It affects supply everywhere because some ship got stuck for a week or so. So like it cost the whole world money because that one ship got stuck. Because that shortcut, there was no other way. That was the way. A change in supply of imported goods and services will have an effect on the same goods produced in the U.S. If you can't get your good from overseas, China, India, wherever, that was supposed to come through Suez to the East Coast, maybe there's a producer in America, Canada, Mexico, somewhere closer that can supply it and make a profit. The government can also restrict imports. We did this in China. We restricted some imports. I think we were importing, oh, I don't know. Let's look. What does U.S. import from China? I think like uh, electrical, furniture, toys, things that are labor intensive to make. There are things that come from China to here because we're both trying to profit off each other. Let's see. Electrical, machinery, furniture and bedding, toys and sports. Um, we do even bring in agriculture from China. Um, looks like fruits and vegetables, snack foods, spices, fresh vegetables, tea are the main ones. Um, does it talk about exports? Yeah, here's exports. What are we sending to China? Let's look at that. We're sending machinery too, particularly electrical machinery, aircraft. Apparently, our planes are better. Optical and medical instruments, vehicles. They're getting a lot of that from us, and they get some farm goods from us too, like soybeans, pork products. We produce more than them, so we're sending it to them. So that's what trade is. But there was an issue between China and America in terms of people felt like China's economic behavior was unfair. And there's some truth to that because they've been caught violating copyright laws. They've been caught reproducing our intellectual property and not compensating the makers here. But because there's 1.2 billion people, we don't usually yell that much because the government, those businesses want to keep doing trade, even though they're frustrated that what they invested in was stolen. See the joke here? Can Billy come out and compete in the global economy? Things are interrelated. Anyway, generally, import tariff wars are bad for consumers because either way, it's going to drive your costs up. If we don't allow toys or furniture to come in from China, then American producers are going to charge you more for supplying it here. That's just the way it is. And it would work the same there too. And sometimes they've used import taxes or tariffs to protect local, especially new burgeoning industries. But generally, that's bad for people buying stuff. So, input prices. If there's an increase in your costs, generally the prices will go up and supply will go down because it costs too much to make. If you have a decrease in costs, you get a right shift and the supply will decrease. In other words, if it's cheaper to make it, you'll supply more. Hopefully that makes sense. If it gets more expensive, you'll supply less. If it gets cheaper, you'll supply more. That's basically the gist of it. Technology. Uh, it'll cause an increase in production if in most cases. Like consider the light. Electric light made it possible for people to work at night. So people start working at night. That's not the best for workers, but it's the best for production. Okay. Expectation of price. If you expect prices to go up in the future, you will make plans to supply more stuff in the future, but not right now. the expectation of a lower price in the future, you'll probably produce more now and try to produce less in the future. So you got to look at now versus later, and then you'll follow that. I think that's pretty clear. Other shifters on supply. If more firms enter the market, you're going to get a glut of supply. So the supply of the good will rise, it will increase. You get a right shift. If a bunch of firms leave the market because they say, yeah, oil, that's not the way. Solar power, wind power, that's the way. Electric cars are the way. So you might see a decrease in the supply of a good or a left shift. This should be erased in the original notes. I'm going to go back and do that to make sure you're writing that in. Let's see. So it's always about trying to make it better. Not perfect, just a little better. So I'm going to get rid of this word so you have to write it in. And we're almost done here. So, just to summarize, if more firms come in, the number of goods are going to rise. If a bunch of firms leave, the supply of the goods will decrease. Now, let's summarize the supply shifters. Make sure we got it all. All right. So, price causes a movement along the curve, doesn't cause a shift. But input prices, whether it's the raw material, whether it's the physical tool like a factory, assembly line, labor costs, that'll shift the S curve. If the costs go down, supply will increase. If the cost goes up, the supply will decrease. Technology, if it makes things cheaper to make, it'll increase the supply. That's generally how it goes. Otherwise, why would you add technology? Number of sellers, or if you have less technology, it'll lead to a smaller supply. If you have more sellers, you're going to have an increase in the supply. If you have less sellers, you have a decrease in the supply. If there are expectations of higher prices in the future, you're going to try to produce more now. Your expectations of lower prices in the future, you're going to produce more in the future, produce less in the future, but you're going to try to produce more now. Hopefully that all makes sense. We're going to try to practice. Let's go ahead and copy this part. And I think we're going to be making a graph. But let's give some extra points for this. Let's make this one worth 10. And we'll make the other one worth 20. And so that's going to add some more points to our total. Because I think the graphing can be tedious and hard to stay focused on. So I think making it worth a couple extra might be enough at the margin to get you to give a little more effort and struggle through it, regardless of how it works out. Well, I'm going to keep adding to this total, hoping my running total is correct, but not fully thinking it's going to be correct because I don't know. But I'll try. All right. Where are we at? Let's see if we can make this graph now. So again, I'm going to copy these. Supplies curve for glazed donuts. Oh, are we thinking Krispy Kreme? I know some people really like Krispy Kreme. Okay, pretend like it's Krispy Kreme, if that's your bag. I think some people also just think any donut is cool. I know that my daughter's in the any donut is a good day. All right, supply curve for glazed donuts. Let's make our line. Let's make another line. I think that's good. Let's put a text box in. Let's say the price. Should it be the per donut price? Let's start at a fancy donut shop, $3. Let's do a turn, $2.50, $2, $1.50, ballot, 50 cents. Don't like where that is. So we're looking at the whole shop. So this time we're going to go in the hundreds of donuts. Hopefully that makes sense to you. Let's go 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700. That's enough. So probably Dunkin' Donuts makes a ton of donuts. At $3, company is going to be willing to make 800 donuts. At 250, 700, something like this. Demonstrate a decrease in price of glazed donuts. Easy. Just as a decrease in price in glazed donuts. Means it's down here. Demonstrate a change in supply if sugar goes up in price. If sugar goes up in price, I'm going to be able to make less of a good. I would want to, right? So I'm going to shift this one. Because my costs are going to go up. I'm going to make less at 50 cents. It goes up in price. I'm going to only, it's going to cost me more. So I think that's the issue. I'm going to produce less. See how my overall production is less here? So let's put a letter on that. No, that one's B. Or actually, these are numbered, huh? So that one should be 3. This one should be 2. 4. Demonstrate changes by them. They go out of business. Okay. So there are going to be fewer sellers. It's going to be similar to what's happening here. If the cost goes up, you're going to supply less. But they're not the only people that make donuts. Mom and Pa Donut Shop makes donuts. Krispy Kreme makes donuts. Dunkin' Donuts is just one donut maker. Demonstrate changes what donut begins using a new computerized cooking process. So now you can have supply more, cheaper. So now you're going to make more. Maybe you go way over here. Or even off the mat. I think that's what you were saying here. Let's throw a 5 next to this one. And say, pat ourselves on the back for doing such a beautiful job. Save and close and hope it looks beautiful. Oh my gosh, does not look beautiful? That is a 10-point answer to me. That's what I'm planning to give, at least. I don't like that number there. Let's get that number out of there. I think I did. And I think that's good. Beauty. Let's do the quiz, and we'll call it a lecture. How do input costs affect supplies? Input costs increasing leads to lower supplies. Input costs, while input costs decreasing, leads to higher supplies. While lower input costs lead to higher supplies. Well, let's look. Did we get it? Increase, supply shift left. Decrease, supply shift right. In other words, increase, produce less. Decrease, produce more. That's right. How can the government affect supply? Again, write in the exact words at first. Affect supply by providing subsidies, taxes. What else was it? This is just the government. Regulation. Subsidies, taxes, regulation. Let me repeat it one more time. Governments affect supply by providing subsidies, taxes, and regulations. Not writing that one out fully. Examples of how other factors influence supply. Other factors influence supply through, I don't know, what are they talking about here? Oh, these things. Input prices, technology, number of sellers, expectations of future costs. Through input prices, future costs, expectations. It's that one. Notice I'm not doing them in order. That's on purpose so I can remember. Input prices. Oh, technology improvements and additional suppliers. That's it for the slideshow. Hopefully, it went well for you. Um, but that's it. And we got 2 sections done in one period's time. Peace, peace, peace. I hope it helped.